Cristina dov'è? Funziona questo? L'accendessero. Pronto? Bonjour à tout le monde. Nous sommes ici pour cette table ronde très animée, très participée.
Hello, everyone. We are here for this roundtable discussion. I can see that we have a large number of speakers. So I would like to welcome all speakers, and we're here to imagine peace together in the context of the Mediterranean. This is not easy. The title is a title which I have loved because in a very simple but effective way, it gives us a depiction of the Mediterranean as it stands today. It isn't just today's history, it's a very ancient history. There are so many things to be said, it is impossible to summarize them in just a few words. I would like to say something which, in my experience and in the experience of many of those who are going to speak today, well, let's say that the Mediterranean has discovered and invented so many things which are now part of our global heritage, trade, globalization, culture, exchanges between peoples. And there is this very deep soul of the Mediterranean where we find this antinomy. It is liquid. So much has been said today about liquid society. And then inevitably, there is also a reference to the shores surrounding the Mediterranean, the lands which surround the Mediterranean basin. So we have these regions and countries. And so we have this dual nature of the Mediterranean. And the consequences that so much has originated from the Mediterranean. But those of us who have been fortunate enough to live close to the Mediterranean Sea may have grasped that in the Mediterranean, it is necessary to take the initiative. It is necessary to be led by a dream, by a project, any dream, any project, but we must take the initiative. It's up to us to act, because otherwise there are so many words, there are so many silences, but in the end, it is crucial to act. For example, Phoenicians in ancient times. Well, Phoenicians made a very deliberate choice with reference to the Mediterranean. They embarked on trade, on sea voyages. And now we shall discuss some specific areas in the Mediterranean. We shall hear from scholars, from people who have studied the Mediterranean, who have loved and sometimes cursed the Mediterranean, who have organized the meetings and workshops, who have reflected and studied. So it is a way of taking action, of taking the initiative vis-à-vis this liquid sea. And at the same time, we also want to bear in mind the shores, the land which exists around this basin. So at this point, I would like to follow my agenda. We are going to start with André Vauchez. He needs no introduction. You know him very well. You know that he's a professor of history.
Alors, c'est historienne, je ne lis pas toute la liste, je vous fais mémoire seulement du fait qu'il a écrit un livre
I will not be
remarquable
reading
sur le
everything,
procès d'Assise
but
qui a été
I would only
traduit
like to
en
say
langage
that there is a
reste
very
jusqu'à
important book
maintenant une
on
point de
Saint
repère
Francis
pour
of
la figure de
Assisi,
François et à travers lui
and is still a point of
même
reference.
pour
This book is still a
ceux qui
point of
sont
reference, an important landmark when it comes
même
to
pour
studies
moi je pense
on the figure of Saint
toujours pas
Francis. And also when it comes to the topic of our discussion, the Mediterranean. So you have the floor.
Les considérations qui vont suivre vont paraître bien inactuelles, mais il me semble que la sainteté de François est quelque chose qui n'est pas inactuel et qui doit être considéré comme une grande figure spirituelle par toutes les religions et, je dirais, par de larges secteurs de l'opinion publique dans les milieux incroyants. Donc François est peut-être le seul saint chrétien dont la réputation, au moins depuis la fin du XIXe siècle, a dépassé largement les limites de l'Église et s'est étendu à l'ensemble, je dirais, du monde. Il a été souvent cité de façon admirative par Gandhi, par Tolstoï, par des gens qui n'étaient pas nécessairement catholiques, mais qui se sont reconnus en lui. Pourquoi alors cette fascination de François et d'Assise? Bien, un des aspects fondamentaux de cette réputation justifiée, à mon avis, tient dans le fait qu'il a été un homme de paix, et au sens le plus fort du terme. Le monde contemporain, en effet, a découvert en François d'Assise le premier homme en Occident, au moins, à avoir compris et mis en relief le lien existant entre la pauvreté, l'humiliation subie et la guerre. Le constat qu'avait fait en son temps le pauvre d'Assise s'appuie sur deux convictions fondamentales. La première est la nécessité d'associer le service des personnes en état de faiblesse, les indigents, les handicapés, les marginaux, les prisonniers, à l'action pour la paix. Leur apporter de l'aide, leur témoigner de l'estime et de l'amitié pourrait être le début d'un processus de réintégration des exclus dans la société et les détourner de la violence. Comme le montre l'histoire du loup de Gubbio, qui ne vaut pas seulement pour les rapports entre les hommes et les animaux. On a beaucoup glosé sur cet épisode de François qui réintègre en quelque sorte le loup dévorant qui dévorait les hommes dans la société, mais ce n'est pas seulement un problème de rapport avec les animaux, c'est une certaine attitude en général de recherche du dialogue et de réintégration des exclus pour les détourner de la violence. La seconde conviction était le désir de contribuer à la résolution des conflits par l'écoute et la prière, comme on le voit en 1226, lorsque François réussit à amener le podestat, c'est-à-dire le chef des autorités municipales, et l'évêque d'Assise à se réconcilier et à trouver un compromis pour mettre un terme à leur conflit. En effet, je m'arrête un instant sur ce conflit-là, parce que nous avons là un cas particulier, un cas précis qui nous permet de voir comment François agit dans une situation de conflit total. En effet, les autorités, deux autorités s'affrontaient à Assise. Je résume de façon très sommaire. Une autorité de type politique qui s'était affirmée au cours des 50 ans précédents, celle de la commune, c'est-à-dire l'ensemble des citoyens, ou en tout cas la couche supérieure du popolo, du peuple dans la ville, et puis l'évêque. Et ne voyons pas là un conflit entre spirituel et temporel, car l'évêque était avant tout, l'évêque d'Assise avait été, jusqu'à la fin du XIIe siècle, le seigneur de la ville. Donc, un conflit de pouvoir et qui était arrivé à un tel point que l'évêque avait excommunié le podestat, c'est-à-dire le magistrat suprême de la commune, tandis que ce dernier avait fait publier un avis interdisant toute forme de négociation, d'achat ou de vente avec le prélat. Et dans ce contexte donc d'affrontement dur, François intervient. Il est respecté de tous les côtés. C'est à la fin de sa vie, mais il est extérieur. Il n'est pas le représentant de l'Église ou de la papauté dans ce conflit.
So this conflict, he becomes like a middle agent between the two conflicting parties, and he comes out at night with some brothers of his. They actually start a spontaneous procession, and they start singing the prayer for nature. The famous song of creatures. You know, the canticles of creatures. I don't have to read it out loud. But after this prayer given to God, well, something happens. Something totally unexpected, because he mentioned rivers, the moon, and then at paragraph 10 he says, "Please, God, praise all those who support illness, because they will be um, they will be crowned." So this comes at an expected moment, but it represents his creativity. Yesterday, we were talking about this aspect during the opening session, the capacity to imagine new things by pushing the borders of our imagination. This is the experience by Francis, and this is his spiritual aspiration. This is his aspiration to interpret and transform the world according to the gospel, which is different from other interpretations of the world and other theories of the world. Well, so this spiritual momentum does not intend to find solutions to the conflict between the papacy and politics, but it actually links peoples to Mother Earth and to the world as children of God. So, if I can just shift the terms of the debate, St. Francis is someone who brings in new elements in the debate, and this will help the Pope and the head of municipality to strike a compromise. This is the meeting. Then let's move on to the meeting between St. Francis and Islam. St. Francis leaves for Egypt. He joins the Crusades, the battle reached high, and he witnessed sheer violence. As soon as he lands in Egypt, he finds the hiatus between uh, Christian people and Muslim people. He went there weaponless with a brother of his. He meets Al Kamil, the Sultan of Egypt, and tries to convince him to relinquish war. We don't know what his words. St. Francis might have talked to him about Jerusalem and free access to Jerusalem, but it seems that he put the accent on universal brotherhood and the need to give up violence in the Mediterranean by both religions. This message was heard by both sides. So once again, we see something very peculiar aspect of Francis. He, Saint Francis, met some cardinals, had tried to meet some cardinals before his assignment, and he goes against all odds to put forward his message. At the same time, he considers the other party as a valid interlocutor, worth of a dialogue, worth of a negotiation. Last point that I'd like to raise as to someone important in France is Louis Massignon, who tried to establish a new dialogue between religions, a new peaceful dialogue by revamping the Franciscan approach. He studied at Sorbonne in Paris. He studied the Arabic language. He went to Baghdad and Egypt, and he was supposed to leave for the holy sites. He was a professor of Islamic sciences in France, and he spread spirituality and the knowledge of the Muslim world, and he contributed to spread this culture. He created a special brotherhood, the so-called Badalier, on the Muslim religion. It was a group of prayer. His approach was based on the first rule of Saint Francis, helping brothers, giving them a roof, helping the poor, and live a discreet life on simple elements, and especially on healing compassion. He wanted peace between Muslim and Christians. His initiative was approved by the papacy and was passed on to future generations by the Council Vatican II. And the real strength of Massignon was the respect of other people in a Franciscan perspective. I would like to pinpoint that Pope John Paul II launched an appeal to all religions, and for the first time, he mentions Saint Francis, a craftsman against poverty, and he launched a heated call for interreligious dialogue and in favor of harmony in the world. St. Francis is considered as a visionary, heeding a call for harmony between humanity and nature.
Merci bien, professeur,
Thank you,
de vos mots
Professor.
et
Thank you for
félicitations
your speech. Thank you for
pour
your
la
presentation.
voix qui
Once again,
guide
thank you very much.
dans le chemin du dialogue
Uh,
entre les religions et
this
il
was
y a là
a
relativement
very
intéressant,
helpful
comme l'a
presentation,
indiqué le professeur,
which
c'est
guides us
important après
through modern world and
cette
makes a link between
fondation qui prend
the ancient
l'initiative
world and the new world.
de
So we
mettre
established a new
en
link
communauté
between
d'étendre
Saint
la
Francis and his
mission qu'il a
travels
bien vécue
and
pendant toute sa vie. Cet
Massignon,
amour pour
and
l'islam, que ça veut
this
dire
love for
mêler amour
the Muslim world,
d'étendre
this very same love for
Maintenant, nous
different
sommes
lands and religions. Now,
presque
let's
à
move
la
on.
bonne
Let's move on. Yes,
direction.
uh,
Nous allons
yes, we're on
donner
time.
le mot à la
Let
parole
me
à Dominique
give the
Moïsi.
floor to
Il est
Dominique Moïsi,
responsable de l'Institut
is
Montaigne
a
France
special advisor
et
of the Montaigne Institute in France.
voilà.
And
Et
yeah,
beaucoup de monde lui connaît comme être un expert de
you
géopolitique,
might
un
know
spécialiste
him.
des
He's
politiques
a specialist
internationales,
in
surtout au
international
Moyen-Orient et maintenant
politics and in the Middle East.
témoin même de
So
cette
he's
relation
a
avec
witness of
la
this
Méditerranée.
relationship
À vous la parole, professeur.
with the Mediterranean. Professor Moisey,
Euh,
thank you very much.
je crois que j'ai parlé sans
I
notes.
think I'm gonna deliver an off-the-cuff speech,
Peut-être
and
une
I'm going
expérience
to
personnelle
um,
il y a 30 ans.
explain to you something that happened to me 30 years ago, exactly 30 years ago.
Je participais
And I
en
was
tant que modérateur à
a
certaines
moderator
négociations
inside the negotiation
introductives
round,
du processus
the
d'Oslo. C'était
uh,
à Paris.
Oslo process. These negotiations were held in
L'Institut
Paris
français des relations
at
internationales.
the
Ce qui était traité à l'époque,
French Institute
c'était le
of
statut de
International
Jérusalem.
Relations. The
Les deux
status of
négociants
Jerusalem was at stake then. The
israéliennes
two
et palestiniennes
delegations were present,
étaient en
Israel
désaccord sur tout.
and Palestinian delegations.
Mais
They
quand elles se retrouvaient
were
le
not in
soir,
agreement at all,
quand elles
but
s'agissaient,
um,
les participants se prenaient dans les bras,
participants
s'embrassaient
used to walk hand
et
in
traitaient
hand
comme des
in the
cousins
evening. They used to treat
conscients
themselves as cousins. They
qu'ils
were
avaient
well
une
aware that
responsabilité
they had a shared
historique
responsibility before
d'introduire la
history,
paix dans cette partie du monde.
introducing peace in this part of the world.
La question qu'on ne peut que se poser
Now,
30 ans après,
30 years ago,
en anglais, c'est
a
what
question
went
is
wrong?
raised.
Qu'est-ce
What
qui
went
s'est
wrong in
passé?
English?
Pourquoi
What happened?
ça n'a pas
Why?
fonctionné?
Why
Alors, il y a deux
ha-
types d'interprétations.
didn't it work?
Il y a
There
ceux
are
qui
two
disent
interpretations.
de toute façon, ça ne
Well,
pouvait pas fonctionner.
it couldn't work
Ceux qui s'étaient
regardless
engagés dans
of
le
everything.
processus étaient marginaux
The Oslo
dans leurs
process was marginal
respectifs et
in
malheureusement naïfs.
for both
Et en quelque
sides.
sorte, la
That
culpabilité
agreement
de l'autre.
was actually
Refuser
naive.
cette interprétation qui me
It
paraissait
wouldn't
parfois
understand each other's
cynique
culture.
et
I just
négative,
always rejected this approach.
et
I found it cynical, negative,
avec l'idée que de toute façon, on ne pouvait
and
rien faire.
the underlying idea that nothing could be done.
Il me
In
semble qu'il y
hindsight,
avait
I
trois
think
différences majeures
there were three
entre hier et
main
aujourd'hui.
there are three main differences
Elles sont
between
peut-être importantes
the past and today.
pour mieux
These
comprendre le
differences
présent
might
et
be very
penser
important to understand the
le
present
futur.
and probably
La première
envisage a
différence,
new future. The
la
first
plus
difference is the
basique,
following.
la plus
Let's say
philosophique,
the most overarching philosophical difference is the so-called zeitgeist. In the 90s, the world was full of optimism. The Berlin Wall crumbled, apartheid was terminated in South Africa. We all had that we could make progress, that we could make progress despite the wars in the Balkans. We thought that the wall of hatred would crumble, like the wall of oppression collapsed in Berlin. In Berlin. The second reason was that there were some people who were willing to embody this hope, and one in particular, and I'm referring to someone who looks like the Israeli de Klerk, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. I used to meet him in the morning at the Creon Hotel, and I could see the tension in his eyes and his face. He used to be a winning general of the War of 6 Days, and he had to accept the idea of a Palestinian state beside Israel's. But he knew that this security of Israel was a synonym of the legal status of Israel, and this required the existence of a Palestinian state next to an Israeli state. Was he the Israeli Mandela? Could have become the Israeli Mandela? I don't know. I cannot judge this. Historians will study this question. And then the third factor, which was a winning factor, right now we're in a different period than the 90s. In the 90s, we were in the so-called period of unilateralism. The Hubert Védrine said that the United States were almighty, and the United States fully engaged in the Oslo process, but never managed to finish it up. Unfortunately, the situation is completely different right now. War is back to Europe. The idea that war can win over international law is now widespread. And once again, Netanyahu is a sort of counter Rabin. He's not a source of hope. He is a guarantee of lack of peace. And the international system is actually quite challenging right now. And we have to face a global chaos because there's no order. The United States are not the same as they used to be because no one is willing to put forward a new policy of peace. This is the current context. Many questions are raised. In the 80s, I used to go to Israel quite often, and I used to meet many people in Jerusalem, including the elites of both sides, thanks to the offices of the French embassy and the French consulate. And I could see a clash between two different emotions: humiliations in Jerusalem, regret and fear in Tel Aviv. an inferiority complex in Jerusalem and a superiority complex in Tel Aviv. I now have the impression that the two peoples are joined together, by venom, by the venom of hatred. They share the same culture, the same emotion, which replaced the feeling of yesterday, of the 80s. And I think we need to face this reality and we must be realistic. Right now, what are some keywords that we can mention right now before we fall from the edge? The first point that I would like to mention is the need to accept, embrace the feelings and the point of view of others, empathy for other people's suffering, which means that Jewish people should think about Palestinian children who die. And this is a tragedy. And this is the same tragedy as Jewish children dying. Images coming from Gaza remind us of the ghetto of Warsaw, and they're totally unacceptable. They're just as unacceptable as the images of Warsaw. Children's innocence is universal. And then a second point that is very important to me and very dear to me is just that we should never lose hope. Never lose hope that one day common sense and humanity will return. We are far from this. We cannot find a way out. We cannot find a way out from the current predicament. But we can actually mention three criteria to nourish hope and to feed hope. The first one being the idea that current governments and regimes, current political majorities are not everlasting. They will last forever. Uh, our perspective should go beyond Netanyahu's government, far right government. And sooner or later, Mullah will no longer rule in Iran. Sooner or later, the people will say we should do more. We should mobilize ourselves. And there's no room for despair. We need to keep a spark of hope for ourselves.
Nous avons écouté dans les paroles de Dominique Moïsi un témoin de l'amour pour la Méditerranée dans les perspectives très grandes et très si pleines de tragédies et d'espoir en même temps, que c'est la question de la processus de paix et du futur de la Terre sainte, d'Israël, de l'État hébreu, des Juifs. Et ça, c'est un morceau de l'histoire dans lequel, comme il a bien expliqué le professeur Moïsi, il n'y a pas de chance si on se donne à soi-même l'espoir et la chance et si on prend de l'initiative, même au niveau, sans doute au niveau gouvernemental, institutionnel, mais même au niveau personnel. Qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire pour imaginer la paix dans le contexte de ce que, comme chrétiens, nous appelons la Terre Sainte. Très bien. Maintenant, nous allons écouter une autre voix très importante, toujours autour de la... Voilà. autour du thème sur lequel nous confrontons ce matin, c'est-à-dire Ghaleb Bencheikh. C'est lui-même très connu, mais c'est en même temps connu comme le fils de grand Bencheikh, qui à Paris, c'est un homme intramontable, une mémoire intramontable. Et lui, personnellement, c'est islamologue et depuis 2018, il est président de la Fondation de l'Islam de France, qui est ici en France, connaît très bien comme une institution très importante des relations entre les musulmans et des relations des musulmans avec la société française de façon plus générale. À vous la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mesdames et Messieurs, avant
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I like that I'm feeling a bit tired, but I'm very pleased to be here. But this is an advantage for the interpreters because I'm going to speak slowly, so their job is going to be easier. So let's start with some discipline. I'm gonna end my speech at 10:23 after 10 minutes.
I would like to start by thanking the Sant'Egidio community for having organized this international meeting. I had the opportunity to participate in the Assisi meeting, which was held in 1986, and then I was back in Rome in 1987. So we incessantly searched for peace. So we never stopped thinking about peace. We never stopped asking for a just, enduring, and honorable peace, which can only be grounded in right and justice. So we speak of the peace of the world, but what really is important is inner peace, peace for our hearts. Now, I don't want to quote the Quran. I will simply paraphrase what the Quran says. No people, no community, no human group, if they can, and if we consider the individual members of this group, there can never be a real conversion. Because what is truly crucial is empathy, as was mentioned by Mr. Moïse. So empathy is the essence of our search for peace, and the lack of empathy is synonymous with a barbarian culture. So it's important to imagine peace, especially at these times characterized by conflicts and tensions throughout the world, exacerbated by these, shall I say, non-social networks, which have become a magma of hatred. It is the new ill of our society in a world which is increasingly brutalized, where we have peoples who are harrowed. And I am thinking specifically of the eastern shores of the Mediterranean. So this is precisely the topic we are discussing today, a very troubled history for the Mediterranean. And why is this? Well, we are listing the reasons why we've had this very troubled history for this Mediterranean Sea. Now, I don't want to sound as if I were totally disenchanted and disappointed, but we have been imagining peace for such a long time. Why are we discussing this again today? Are we destined to be like Sisyphus, constantly having a stone being pushed uphill and rolled down again? Some may think that this is the case. Others instead don't want to give up, and I am amongst the latter. I don't want to give up. I never want to resign myself to the end of hope. There must always be hope. Hope must always emerge at the end of the worst tragedies. Some may not agree, but we instead are prompted by hope. We continue believing, we continue trusting, we continue raising to these important challenges for our future. If we are to analyze the current situation and its history, we can certainly identify that there are fractures, there are power imbalances, and also a betrayal of the ideals which had inspired revolutions in the past. So, if we are to go back to a more optimistic vision, we need to revise history, to review history. I'm addressing the professor, correct me if I'm wrong. I know it has been a troubled history. I only have 5 minutes left, but I would have this story start with Seneca, and in Medea by Seneca, we can see the inkling of the early globalization process. And he wrote that our ancestors knew the time of innocence, a world that was multifaceted. The elsewhere was truly an elsewhere, and now instead our ships have reduced these different types of elsewhere to one. Obstacles have been overcome, the sea has been dismantled, that nothing is like it used to be. So, if this is what Seneca wrote, what can we say, especially with reference to some major challenges which I would like to mention at the end of my presentation? So, we need to review and revise history. Now, I don't want to complain, but I can tell you that I'm very, very tired that we have this mutilating presentation of history. We must remember that the Mediterranean basin, as we learned in our textbooks at school, the Mediterranean basin is part of a wonderful civilization and has represented a major era, a major role for a long, long time in the history of humankind, starting from the Judeo-Christian monotheism. So we need to stress this. And here, let us also recognize the contribution given by Arab Muslims to universal knowledge, to the knowledge of the Mediterranean itself, to the knowledge of Southern Europe. If I had more time, I will list you. I will give you a very long list of geographers and explorers who made it possible for us to better know and better understand the Mediterranean. I only have 3 minutes left, so I will briefly analyze the challenges which lie ahead. We apologize. Unfortunately, the sound um, doesn't make it possible for us to hear the speaker properly. Now, it's all very well to use fine words and to mention humanitarian values, international law, uh, equality, the only compass, the only beacon is to do away with all forms of double standards. And then the second challenge is finding a new economic balance with a better distribution of wealth. And then we have another important challenge, seeking good governance, democracy, right of law, the respect of the individual's conscience in a given country. Putting an end to the weaponization of religions, which are manipulated to serve one's own purposes. We must instead foster freedom, especially freedom of religion. And there is also another challenge, the need to manage migratory flows. It isn't just a question of numbers here. We know that the Mediterranean has now become a cemetery, and there is also an environmental challenge. The Mediterranean basin suffers from climate change, from global warming. So I'm not just speaking of natural resources here, I'm speaking of the crucial need to protect the sea so that this sea may truly deserve the title of Lake of Peace. But we can only do this if we retrace our roots to humanism, the humanism of the Age of Enlightenment. So we must bring this humanism up to date. We know that the Mediterranean societies are torn apart by hatred. Instead, we want to be forward-looking. We want to have this clear, peaceful view of the Mediterranean as a lake of peace, enduring peace. I am very grateful to our speaker for his wonderful words. Each and all of us try to give our contribution. Certainly, we know that there are difficulties, there are dramas and tragedies which cannot be overlooked. But this is not the last word. Yes, there are tragedies, but there is always the problem. There's always the possibility of building something for the future. So this is the most important contribution, I think, that we can give.
Now then, we have a new speaker. Gilles, like Egidio. And if I may, I would like to advertise something. This is his last book. It's called Le Bouleversement du Monde, which is a world in turmoil. Let's keep our eyes on the Mediterranean Sea. This sea is already a troubled sea. Gilles, the floor is yours. Thank you. I would like to be, and I'm trying to be as brief as possible, and I try to be as lofty as previous speakers who have delivered very powerful speeches, and I'd like to abide by the time given to me. Unfortunately, I am not a humanist as my predecessors, and my name is the same as Egidio. who is a pilgrim, who used to be a pilgrim in the Mediterranean. He came from Athens in the 5th century, and they used to cross the sea, and he traveled as far as Arles. He traveled to Nice. He was a solitary uh, monk, and he founded an abbey, and then the Muslims came in, and he had to flee. And the worship of Saint Gilles knew its golden age after the Muslim left, and his abbey became very important. And people used to live for the crusades from there, from his abbot. Now, paradoxically, history is now making a link with Egidio, and we are facing challenges that are just as important as in the Middle Ages. And I would like to link up with my friend Dominique Moïsi, and I would like to zero in on the current situation in the Holy Land. I would like to mention Don Vittorio. This week, the conflict might exacerbate. It might become even more intense if possible. You saw last week after the mobile phones, the pages attack, and there might be more attacks after attacks on Hezbollah and violent retaliation who forced, we saw many Israelis trying to find a shelter, and people had to leave the south of the Lebanon and shift towards the south because there might be a land attack in southern Israel. So this occurs just before the celebration religious of the Kippur. We at the pinnacle, at the cusp of the Israel-Palestine conflict. But I think the conflict of today is very severe, and it probably lays the foundation for a new conflict. Let me follow the thread unraveled by Dominique. On the one hand, I think that Netanyahu intends to achieve his own aim, a military victory. Right now, there is a vacuum at the White House in the United States. Joe Biden has actually thrown the sponge, and Israel must win before January. They have to choke Hamas, and Israel wants to set the conditions for new negotiations, but from a position of strength, from a winning position. Therefore, Mr. Netanyahu thought that Hamas would bark but would not bite. And this was a major mistake, which led to the October the 7th massacre. But Hezbollah, the Hezbollah Iran coalition is viciously against Israel. Unlike Hamas, who come from Sunnites, Hezbollah comes from the Shiites. So there was a marriage of interest. What happened on October the 7th was actually triggered by Hamas without giving notice to Tehran, and this led Iran and Hezbollah to follow in the footsteps of Hamas. So we saw some blows to Hezbollah, some blows to Iran's to Iran, and their future is actually at stake right now. So this reminds us of something. This reminds us of the fall of communism. So in one sense, Dominique reminded that peace might return. It might the cards might be reshuffled. War is unfortunately unavoidable, and we need to think about a future. Israel will have to reinvent itself if Netanyahu survives his judiciary trials, and if he survives the war, Israel might function only without him. When former Prime Minister Ben Gurion exempted a part of the population from the draft, from the military draft, he was criticized. But today, figures are different. The axis of resistance can no longer last. In Iran's society, if I understood properly, a part of the establishment believes that a new future should be built and a more structured order should be built with the help of MBS. So a new peace should be envisaged, and it should be a realism-based peace. This is the only solution for the period after the conflict. That's why this initiative is particularly useful. It comes at the right moment because we are talking about peace, we're talking about peace from the prism of Christendom, but we'll also have to analyze the situation after the conflict. I start from Gilles, from Egidio, to analyze a possible and to envisage a possible future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gilles or Giles or Egidio, for this wonderful race from the past to the present. You've also given us an overview of the future prospects for peace to come. And I think that Gilles has said something very important about the Mediterranean, namely that the Mediterranean attracts also faraway countries such as Iran or Austria or even Germany in an indirect and direct way. At the same time, these are countries which are linked to the Mediterranean. And perhaps this is the reason why this sea has had such a troubled history. And now I'd like to give the floor to Cardinal Gualtiero Bassetti, who has tried to take the initiative in the Mediterranean, organizing a very important meeting. There have been problems and conflicts, as is always the case whenever we are dealing with the Mediterranean. It was a meeting involving bishops and other personalities in the wonderful city of Florence, whom I suggest you visit. So, Your Eminence, you have the floor. Well, I was head of the Italian Bishops' Conference for 5 years, and yet this, I think, was an important, significant initiative, which I tried to organize for the Mediterranean. I was inspired by a quote by Lapira. Lapira said that the Mediterranean must go back being what it used to be in the past, namely the sea of Abraham's family. Abraham has a very large family, Jews, Muslims, Christians, and the ecosystem, the habitat, the environment of this family is precisely the Mediterranean. So we must see to it that peace is restored in the Mediterranean, and then this peace can radiate to the whole world. So this was Lapira's intuition. And I did try to follow Lapira's inspiration, which was not easy, of course. But how could I tell my colleagues, the other bishops, let's take this initiative, let's meet with all bishops in the Mediterranean basin, let's try to organize a conference with the participation of all bishops' conferences. It was not easy. And then I had a second inspiration, which was sent to me by the Lord. And I thought, well, let me discuss this with the Pope. I will go to the Pope and speak to him about this, and the Pope will tell me it is only a dream, or maybe will tell me go ahead with this. And this is what happened. The Pope said, yes, go ahead. He said, you are the head of an important bishops' conference. The Italian Bishop Conference is very important in Europe. So you do have the possibility of convening all other heads of bishops' conferences or all other heads of other dioceses in Europe. And this is how this initiative originated. What was the specific trait of the Mediterranean? Well, in my view, the Mediterranean has an important call, an important mission. God said to Abraham, go towards the land that I will indicate to you. And around the Mediterranean, throughout history, we can see the development of over 30 different civilizations. And I'm speaking of major civilizations. This is where Jesus was born, where the apostles were born, St. Francis, St. Benedict were all born there. The Mediterranean straddles three continents. So you will agree with me, the Mediterranean has a specific call, a specific mission. This was my original intuition, and this is how the initiative originated. Now, let me go straight to the heart of the matter. I don't want to take up too much time. There is a possible solution which could be adopted. We might implement what has emerged on the 4th of February 2019 in Abu Dhabi, when there was this meeting between the Abu Dhabi Imam, and some important points have been made by the Imam and by the Holy Pontiff, by His Holiness the Pope. So, what are these points which were made? What was said? Well, the two religious leaders said, how can we hope for peaceful and tolerant cohabitation with the exercise of unreserved brotherhood? So unless there is this implementation of unreserved brotherhood, it is impossible for us to have a peace. And let me go on. How can we safeguard and protect each other in the common human family unless we do our utmost to build this human family? If we cannot build this human family, it becomes very difficult to speak of war and peace. And then how can we have our communities understand the importance of those who are others than us, those who are different than us, those who bear a different religion, a religious tradition, because our instinct is to reject anyone who is different from us. But unless we welcome and accept those who are different from us, there can be no peace. And the two leaders also wondered how can religions be parts of a brotherhood instead of being um, in boundaries which cannot be overcome? So, my dear friends, all of these questions require a generous commitment, the desire to study and work in order to promote projects for justice and peace. So let me come to my conclusion. And I would like to say that Giorgio Lapira did have a prophetic intuition. A helpless, unarmed leader on the international scene. His whole life was devoted to the dismantling of barriers and the building of bridges. The two popes, Paul VI and John Paul II, used an expression which they did not coin themselves. They borrowed it from Lapira, dismantling walls, building bridges. So Lapira replaces conflict with the supremacy of the cultural dialogue, putting in all of our efforts in Europe, Latin America, and Africa. At the center of his wonderful intellectual reflection, inspired by Christian faith, he has pursued the ideal of a radical peace, which is understood not as merely being the absence of war. Because if we just pursue peace as an absence of war, it's going to be a very elusive objective. But according to Lapira, to his eschatological vision, the whole of history must converge towards the final harbor peace. So Lapira speaks of the triple family of Abraham, and this triple family is the cradle of all monotheistic civilizations. I'm very moved in recalling Lapira's words, which I was able to hear in person when I lived in Florence, and Lapira was still alive. And he said, as an unquenchable source of universal civilizations, where all men and women can search for the light of knowledge, the grace of beauty, and the warmth of brotherhood and fraternity. So he concluded this particular address, this particular speech, with the following words. How wonderful the prospects of people's histories if they are seen in the light of grace and hope. The light of grace and hope. This is Lapira in his essence. And he concluded by saying, the earth was created by God for this very purpose. He wanted the whole earth to flourish like Messianic Jerusalem. Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Eminence, for your kind words.
Pour avoir présenté à un public français.
Thank you, Your Eminence, for your words. Thank you for having spoken about this important figure to French audience, and even those who were already acquainted with Lapira will have found your presentation very interesting. Giorgio Lapira was the mayor of Florence. The late Giorgio Lapira was the mayor of Florence, but he took a very personal initiative. Many enemies said it is dangerous, it is a crazy idea to organize this discussion on the Mediterranean. It's a waste of the city's money. But instead, he understood the importance of this topic, and we, I think, can see this very clearly from the Cardinal's words. The Cardinal was able to hear the words which were actually spoken by Lapira and has been inspired by these words in pursuing peace in the Mediterranean. And now I'd like to give the floor to Anija Benguenna. I would like to thank her very warmly for her presence. She's a well-known journalist in Algeria and Switzerland. And even more importantly, she is a representative of Al Jazeera. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your presence here. She's an important figure in the Mediterranean because she's Algerian.
I'll try and speak as slowly as possible to help our interpreters. Thank you for our dear friends of the Sant'Egidio community for their remarkable work in favor of those who are suffering from war, violence, and poverty. I am very pleased right now to participate to this panel. We have focused on the conflict in the Middle East, but I would like to pinpoint something. I would like to mention Sant'Egidio's activity. I've been working with them for 20 years, and the, this conference, this year's conference is very rich. We have many forums. I was expecting a forum on the war in Gaza. Obviously, there are many important topics related to peace, but I was expecting a panel exclusively dedicated to the war against Gaza. When we talk about imagining peace, how can we imagine peace in such a troubled area like the Middle East? How can we remove the barriers to peace, as we see on TV or on social media? This topic should be dealt with inside a panel or a forum. What is currently going on in the West Bank and Gaza is very uh, serious. Obviously, the Ukraine has already uh, taken much space within the Sant'Egidio community. I think I was surprised yesterday. Yesterday, I was following the news in Paris, and I saw that the Al Jazeera's office in Ramallah was actually closed by a military order. It was actually closed off live on TV. No one has seen this, probably, and the director of the office in Al Jazeera was talking to troops from Israel. The director actually received this order, this evacuation order, and he read it aloud live. This has been something unprecedented. This is going on because Israel is actually carrying on this perspective of force and power. I would like to give you a witness on Gaza. I was in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in Gaza, and I tried to cover what life is like under the occupation. I was there during the Ramadan, March, April this year. I spent 3 weeks there. I saw with my own eyes the sufferings due to the occupation of Israel. Gaza has been beset by aggressions. The reason is quite clear: the siege and the occupation by Israel. Many journalists are in the grip of forces who would like to kill them in silence. Israel want to force journalists to stay silent. Journalists cannot access the Gaza Strip. Those who dare to break this order are violently killed. Journalists are not allowed inside the Gaza Strip, and I'm referring to Wael al-Habdu, who, whose wife and kids were killed. Ismail al-Roul died, and he was another journalist who was killed in the Gaza Strip. What was their what they were guilty about? They only held a microphone and a pen. Many international associations had already pointed the finger at these incidents before the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Another colleague of ours, another female colleague of ours, was cold-blooded killed. This happened outside the Gaza Strip. I was next to the wall. She was killed, and the slogan was written: "Words will endure." I will never forget this writing on the wall. I do understand the Palestinians. I saw the sufferings with my own eyes. I can understand what they feel when they try and access the Mosque of Aqsa in Jerusalem. Access was prevented to me 4 times, and I totally understood what the Palestinians feel when they're stopped at the checkpoint. They have to stop for 2, 3, 4 hours if they just want to cross the road. Obviously, I wouldn't like to speak as a journalist only. As Vittorio has just said, I come from Algeria and I am a resident of the Mediterranean, if you like. And I was fortunate enough to travel around the sea. And I traveled around it with a group of women in 2017. This is an episode worth um, telling. We crossed the sea on board of a small ship. There were 13 of us. Our leader was a general of a former US general. She handed her resignation after the occupation of Iraq and writes, joined together women from Canada, UK, Ireland, I can't remember all countries, 13 countries though. She led us on board the ship. This ship was called Olive, and this ship was swaying in this troubled sea. We just only had pasta to eat, some apples, uh, which we finished very soon, and we ate pasta for days. Our aim was to break the siege again, against break the siege on Gaza. We went through storms and peril, but this small ship landed, and the forces of occupation were awaiting us. The political geography of the Mediterranean is clear and is actually depends on wars or alliances. And we see, for instance, the occupation of the Gaza Strip. We see the poverty of refugees in Libya on the other shore of the Mediterranean. Despite all this, we have quite a few good examples which give us hope and shed our light on our path. As an Algerian resident, I, I support the Sant'Egidio community. And in the 90s, an initiative was created to help Algeria after 10 years of a bloody conflict. This conflict led to 250,000 victims. The Sant'Egidio community led a very good initiative. These are beacons on both shores of the Mediterranean. The idea of trying to stop bloodbaths on both sides of the Mediterranean, including Algeria. When I meet with Mario Giro, he always mentions this initiative. He was one of the most prominent representatives, and I'm referring to 1995. These are shining examples of very useful and good initiatives, even though they were not as successful as they deserve to be. My friend Paola sent me a book from my friend Paolo, um, Algeria kidnapped, a history of a difficult peace. Is that the correct title? Yes. Yes, this book actually summarizes this initiative, how it was created. Unfortunately, this initiative did not end in a success. But when we mention the Mediterranean Sea or the Mediterranean area, we should actually zero in on reconciliation with its past. Memory is very important. Memory will never forget colonialism and occupation by Europe. We have not forgot uh, the arbitrary change of borders and aggressions. This question is still open. We cannot turn a blind eye. There are things that remain. We cannot bury these things underneath the carpet. Uh, these are fractures of history. If we want to build a new society, we need to heal these wounds. We need to either apologize or atone for this. We should acknowledge our responsibilities. Africa was actually divided in three parts by Europe. Belgium had 80 times its surface in Africa with Congo. Belgium actually occupied the so-called, the then so-called Belgian Congo. And we should remember these episodes in history. I know that I have overshot my time, but the future will be brighter if we reconcile with history. All associations are deeply engaged in this, and they play a key role in this process. Thank you.
Monsieur le Président Hélène,
Thank you. Thank you.
on va, j'espère, je continue en français pour les autres. J'espère que tous les personnes ont
I'm
pu
going to continue in French, and I
écouter ce
hope
que Khadija l'a dit à partir
that
de
all
Gaza,
people
de la
here
situation palestinienne, mais même les espoirs.
listened
J'ai mémoire
to
de
her
ces
words
espoirs
very
pour
carefully.
imaginer
Sufferings
la
in
paix
Gaza
prochaine.
and new hopes in the Mediterranean.
L'esprit et l'âme.
We need
Effectivement, je suis
to
convaincu de ça.
hold memory of this
Maintenant,
hope, to dream
je continue
of
la
a
parole à
possible
notre grand témoin,
peace. I am now very pleased to give the floor to another
l'ancien président de la Tunisie,
prominent witness
qui
of the situation in the
est
Mediterranean,
mort
former
le
president of Tunisia.
11 juillet 2014.
Uh,
Et son nom
President of
effectivement
Tunisia from
depuis
2011 to
je suis
2014.
très honoré d'avoir
And I'm referring to Mr. Moncef Marzouki.
écouté
It
sur,
is a great
sur
honor for
André.
us
Merci
to
beaucoup.
have him here and listen to his speech about today's topic. Thank you.
Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Ce matin, avant de venir, j'ai jeté un coup d'œil sur les informations
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This morning, before coming here, I listened to the news, especially news concerning Gaza. 25 people who have died in Gaza, on top of all the others who have died in the previous days in a city which has been 80% destroyed. This devastation hasn't been seen even during the Second World War. No European city has been destroyed to this extent. It's a genocide. It's the early genocide which is currently underway in the Mediterranean. This genocide was denounced by South Africa, which has denounced Israel on January the 11th. I did want to witness this historical process. However, I was told that there is no room for former heads of state. There are 35 seats only. So I have arrived at 3 a.m. I queued up. Bilanchon was there as well, and Couvi. It was very cold, but at 9 a.m. we managed to get into the room where there were 30 people who had accepted to stand in a queue for literally hours. And I witnessed something truly extraordinary. Before my eyes, there was this incredible image, 20 judges, men and women, some of them elderly, who represented international justice. It was truly very moving. And then there were two groups. On my right-hand side, some people from South Africa. On my left-hand side, from Israel. I observed the two groups carefully, as I am a good observer, and I was very attentive. I observed the two groups very carefully. On my right-hand side, I had the South Africans. The people of humankind, blonde women, black men, an Indian speaker who made a wonderful address, Muslims, perhaps some Christians, some Jews, truly humankind that was represented. On the other side, I had instead the people tribe, one religion, one race. I don't want to be offensive. But anyway, these two groups represented two completely different opposing solutions to the same problem. What is this problem? Well, let us imagine heavenly mechanics. Sometimes it may happen that there is a brutal clash between two cosmic bodies, and this is exactly what has happened. The history mechanics, the history mechanism led to the clash of two different peoples in a very brutal way, and this led to all sorts of forms of unhappiness, as we well know. Jews were persecuted, humiliated, murdered, holocausted, if I may use this word, were looking for a land. They were looking for a home where they could live and lead a life. On the other hand, the Palestinian people just wanted to continue living in their land with their children, with their family, the same thing. So on the one hand, we had impoverished Dutch farmers who were seeking a place where to live, and there was a collision with the other people who just wanted to grow and develop. So we have exactly the same problem, the brutal clash, the brutal collision between two different tragedies, two different destinies. So how can we solve the problem? And I could see before my very eyes two opposing solutions, the Mandela solution and the Netanyahu solution. The Mandela solution was to leave behind racism. And speaking about racism, I remember that a South African friend told me that there used to be a proverb often mentioned in South Africa. You can get a black person out of the jungle, but you cannot take the jungle out of this black person. This is what the white people used to say during apartheid. Anyway, Mandela's solution was to leave behind racism. Let's try to live together, to cohabit. Let's create a common state. The Netanyahu solution is different. What is today's solution being offered by Netanyahu? Apartheid against the Palestinians since 1948 and the military occupation of the territories. I know the 7th of October happened, but we also had the 6th of October or the 3rd of October. We had 20 years of imprisonment, imprisonment of this population, which has lived in a sort of camp, concentration camp. And Netanyahu's solution is what a war cannot set right can instead be achieved by an even more violent war. So we are speaking here of two completely opposing solutions. South Africa is the example of what should be done as against the example of what should not be done. We are here together to imagine peace. How can we imagine peace today? Well, Professor Moïsi spoke about the 1990s, an extraordinarily optimistic age, but at the time, history was differing, was hesitating. There was a path which could lead to peaceful cohabitation, and another path which could lead to war. Well, we know that that history took the way which led to war, and this is where we find ourselves today. We are at a crossroads. Once again, we either go towards never-ending war, or we choose instead to go towards a peaceful solution. Please forgive me, but like all other human beings, there are some contradictions within myself. As I said, like all other human beings, and as I said, the choice is sometimes one might think between never-ending war and endless war. You may actually think this is the only alternative, but sometimes instead I'm more hopeful and I think no, there can be perhaps a Mandela inspired solution. In Al Jazeera Net some time back, I wrote that perhaps we are no longer discussing a two-state solution. Those who still speak about two-state solutions perhaps deceive themselves. I repeat this on my own responsibility. Or they think we are stupid or they are stupid themselves. It is impossible. It's an impossible solution. Suffice to look at the map. It might have been possible 30 years ago. Or else you can dream. What is the dream one can nurture? The Mandela solution. Is that possible? Well, when I see the level of hatred which exists in the Arab world, well, you know that Israelis were shocked by what happened on the 7th of October, but you cannot even have an idea of what Al Jazeera, to whom I would like to pay tribute here because they do an extraordinary job. They're very objective, they're very unbiased, they're not trying to encourage hatred between Jews and Arabs. They tell the truth. And today I can assure you that if the Israeli have a level of hatred which is 10, what we see in the Arab world is 10 times 10. So can we imagine other solutions other than eternal war, a never-ending war, or endless war? Well, let me go back to my hopes, perhaps to my illusions. Perhaps we can imagine someone speaking about the reconciliation between the French and the Germany on the eve of the Battle of the Somme. Let's imagine the peace between Germans and the Russians after Stalingrad. Would that have been possible? No, you would have thought it was an impossible outcome, but this is exactly what happened. So we do have a glimmer of hope. Human beings are like natural disasters. They are very violent, they are overwhelming, but then everything ceases. The hatred between the French and the Germans after 1870, after the First World War, was not greater than what we have today between Israelis and Palestinians, which leads me to imagine that maybe after having gone through these storms of hatred, there is a glimmer of hope. The two-state solution is over. I repeat, today it is very, very clear that the Zionist process has failed. That is to say, finding a place where Jews could lead a dignified and safe life. The only place well, there is no place which is safe, and certainly Israel is not a safe country at all right now. So the Zionist dream has not been achieved. It was a failure. Hence, we needed to create a Mandela-like state. Mandela was my spiritual father. I met him in the 1990s, where we were all inspired by his example. I went to his funeral, and for me, he is the example of what needs to be done. There are no other solutions. Otherwise, we have never-ending war with the destruction of Israel, the destruction of the whole region, and a huge human toll. So Sant'Egidio, who is the institution which brings forward our dreams, can act to implement the Mandela solution. But this solution is still remote, assuming that it is possible. What is important today is to stop the genocide which is currently underway. There is a genocide underway, and we cannot just stand still watching without acting. So we must all make our voice heard so that these genocide can be stopped. Tomorrow there will be an additional 26 children killed in Gaza, and the day after tomorrow more children will die. So we must hope, dream and act. Thank you. Thank you for this living testimony of the spirit of the Mediterranean. President Marzouki has spoken to us about this. Former president of Tunisia, who is trying to imagine a new future, which is typical of men and women in the Mediterranean. They are immersed in this spirit, in this common destiny. We feel it is a common destiny. There is a lot of individualism today in today's world, but Mediterranean men and women ultimately do not believe in this individualism. They know that future, whatever shape this future may take, let's hope a peaceful future, is a common future, not an individual future. And I was able to see this in the passionate words of President Marzouki.
Now let's move on and let me give the floor to a religious representative from Turkey, Naftali Haleve. He now lives in Turkey, and he is a rabbi in a synagogue in Ortaköy.
Dear friends, I bring you the greetings of good wishes of the Turkish Jewish community. Today, we gather to discuss emerging peace in the Mediterranean basin. The Mediterranean has always been more than just a sea. It mirrors our humanity, reflecting our truths or our trials. From the shores of Egypt to the island of Greece, this region has witnessed the rise and fall of civilization, teaching us that while peace is fragile, and it is within our reach. Throughout the history, peace in this region has been dreamed for not just for Mediterranean nation, but for the people worldwide. Despite its prominence of our wish list, achieving it remains elusive. I approach this topic with cautious optimism. Yet, our optimism must be grounded in reality. Let's visualize the Mediterranean basin. What do we see? Asia on the east, the Middle East region in its entirety, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and the Gaza Strip. In the north, Asia Minor, my homeland also known as the Anatolian Peninsula. In the south, Africa, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and finally Cyprus, between these two continents. Let's continue by going west. One of the largest indentations of the Mediterranean towards the north is the Asian Sea, then Europe. Dodecanese Island, Mora Peninsula, Greece. Another indentation is Adriatic Sea, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Montenegro, Albania in the east. Italy, Sicily, Malta in the west. Finally, France and the Iberian Peninsula, Spain. Even if for a moment we do not take into account the surrounding countries and nations, such as those are on the coast of the Black Sea, who try to go down to the Mediterranean hot seas, and we see that almost all the nations and states, including those that are the homeland of the Asian civilization, are the perpetual contradiction, hostiles, and sometimes armed conflicts with each other in terms of geographical, economic, political, religious, some natural and social interest priorities. I think many international relations experts, as well as political and social scientists, who assign themselves the duty of making interpretation in this field, are just cutting corners by classifying and defining the situation with the distinct self-made titles. They say realpolitik, geopolitics, geostrategic, and some unique cases, petropolitics, petrostrategic, and so on. They bring new initiatives by producing definition and expanding them considerably. But as a clergyman and with the MA in sociology, what saddens and even hurts me the most is the term they cite, theopolitic, theostrategic. I understand that with these experts want to talk about the political strategy that prioritizes religious faith, relation, unity, and opposition. That is religious politic, which is my opinion, is no less hurtful. In addition to the individual relation communication with his ones, religion tries to give meaning to one's life by organizing one's fellow being, one's environment, one's private universe, and it is perhaps one of the most ways to liberate a person from staying as a human being to become humane being. That is why it seems to me is a great injustice to count faith and religion by itself among the reason for the ongoing wars. Instead, religion should be a source of peace and unity. Let's close this parenthesis and return to our main topics. As I recently expressed my views on various platforms, the essential grounds of the peace and well-being people and in countries, or at least the state of non-war and non-hostility, is the correct determination as well correct management of understanding common concern, common benefit between peoples and countries. It should not be forgotten that searching for individual solution problems that concern affect all the humanity will ultimately end up with the brand of new social deadlocks. I think this is what is happening in the Mediterranean basin today and as other parts of the world. Frankly speaking, this makes it very difficult for us to imagine peace in the region. As a clergyman, I do not want to hopeless or to instill despair. But I know just one thing. Those who do not put in effort and try their utmost toward their longings have no right to hope. Undoubtedly, all involved parties have a role to play in this regard. I think that education system that centers humanity, nature of life, which is based on universal values filtered from life itself, teaching our faith will have dominant role in this field. For example, environment protection is a universal concern. The Mediterranean, which supports millions, face the threat from pollution and climate change by cooperating to protect our shared research, which can achieve collective benefits. Economic inequality, migration crisis, and religious tension also require joint efforts. Religious leaders can bridge divides by focusing on shared values rather than difference. Our tradition teaches compassion and community. By emphasizing this, we can inspire reconciliation. Education plays a crucial role. A system grounded in universal values from life experience, faith teaching can foster understanding and empathy. By educating future generations to see each other as equals, we build foundation for lasting peace. As the Bible says, seek peace and pursue it. Peace requires action and commitment for all of us. Without earnest effort, it remains out of reach. In closing, the Mediterranean must evolve from cradle of civilization to cradle of peace. As we live here today, let us not only imagine peace, but actively work toward it through dialogue, education, and of compassion. Each of us has a role in turning this vision into reality. Let us commit ourselves to this cause for the future generation who will inherit this sea and its legacy. I believe that you, dear friends, have also a lot to say on these issues. I conclude my words in order not to exceed the time allotted to me. I reiterated my respect to all of you. Thank you.
Caro Rabbi, merci pour vos mots. Et je pense que même le maire Lapira serait très d'accord avec ce que vous avez dit. C'est-à-dire il faut travailler dans le domaine de la culture, le domaine de la foi.
Yeah, thank you for what you said. And I think Mayor Lapira would be proud of you. Thank you for envisaging a shared future around climate change. And let me mention it. We must preserve our planet, and we must pass on our dream, and we must pass on our struggles as well. Now, let's take a 5 minutes break, okay? 10 minutes break, 10 minutes break, but not real 10 minutes. Let's meet up in 10 minutes sharp, 11:45, because we'll have a debate.
starting, been falling, we go again. Timing so precious, a blessing, don't mess it up all again. Money, it coming, it going, it coming, it go again. Loving is true, it don't go here to stay, go again. Bumping into trouble like a rebels where I came. See the flame shine bright, they were puzzled how I'm saved. I could never serve the passion or the fight or the man or for sight how I am. Ain't nobody asking, I've been basking in my liberty, cause slavery is real. Doesn't mean the shackles gotta be revealed. Fighting with my pen, that's the closest thing to steal. And it's what they wanna steal. There's value in the word, gotta figure out the real. Been juggling and wrestling thoughts in my mind. The influence was heavy, or the faults even mine. Label still persuading like I'm needing a dime. Like my people ain't be dying over gold in the mines. It's funny, right? I'm still numb to the trauma. I couldn't tell if my joy was out of love or what would haunt me when I needed me a hug. That's the realest. Yeah, it's the closest thing to feeling. Yeah, it's the only thing revealing. Trying to get me closer to the Lord, cause maybe he can open up some doors while these words get to show you all my flaws. There's poetry in pain, blessing in the chain, pictures I could paint. Yeah, there's poetry in pain, blessings in the chain, pictures I could paint. Yeah, there's poetry in pain, blessing in the chain, pictures I could paint. Yeah, there's poetry in pain, blessings in the chain, pictures I could paint. No, I've been calling, been stalling, been falling, we go again. Timing so precious, a blessing, don't mess it up all again. Money, it coming, it going, it coming, it go again. Loving is true, it don't go here to stay, it go again.
Sì, ma ecco, se i relatori prendono posto dove stavano prima, poi je profite pour dire au public que ce qui veut poser quelques questions, nous n'avons pas tellement de temps, nous avons une dizaine de minutes, pas plus. Donc il faudrait s'approcher au podium. Non, s'approcher au podium et formuler une question, pas une considération, et demander à quelqu'un de répondre en même temps.
If you want to speak, if you want to participate in the discussion, we only have 10 minutes, please come to the podium and please questions, no comments or long addresses.
Voilà. Ella. Très bien. Allora.
Please come to the podium and give us your name. I only have a question. Who is the question for? To all? To the whole of the audience, to all participants.